Hey guys, tonight we will explore the story of Catherine of Aragon's final revenge, the letter that destroyed Henry VIII. 20 years ago, Catherine of Aragon gave her entire heart and crown to King Henry VIII, who had sworn to love her for her wisdom, nobility, and angelic beauty. She was everything he needed: a faithful wife, a grieving mother burying her sons, and a fierce queen regent who commanded the army to victory in the Battle of Flodden. But when she could not bear the male heir he craved, Henry betrayed all his vows. He used religious grounds to demand an annulment, banish her from court, and declare their only daughter, Mary, illegitimate. Catherine stood firm against Henry for many years, but ultimately she succumbed to her solitude. Yet, on her deathbed, stripped of everything, she wrote a letter. The content of that letter, not a curse, but a word of unconditional forgiveness, became the most cruel sword, piercing his conscience and destroying King Henry VIII forever. This was not weakness, but the most elegant revenge in Tudor history. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, let me know where you're relaxing and what the local time is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Catherine of Aragon arrived in England at the tender age of 16, crossing a storm-tossed ocean to marry Prince Arthur. On the 14th of November, in the year 1501, the ship that carried her entered the harbour of Plymouth under leaden skies, waves crashing fiercely against its sides. The wind howled, as if determined to sweep everything away, and the white-capped breakers rolled in like drifting clouds. Yet Catherine, dressed in a thin velvet gown and a delicate silk mantle, stood firm, though her heart quivered with anxiety. This 16-year-old princess had been betrothed to Arthur since early childhood, under the terms of the alliance between England and Spain. But just over a year later, on the 2nd of April, in the year 1502, Arthur suddenly passed away only 5 months after their wedding. That brief union had been merely ceremonial true affection, and intimacy had scarcely begun. The tragic news struck like thunder on a clear day, leaving Catherine a young bride adrift in a foreign land with no kin and no support. The shoulders of her gown were already worn, her shoes bore the marks of the tempestuous voyage, and she paced the unnamed quay where once joyful songs had now turned into sighs. Rather than return to Spain, Catherine resolved to stay. She chose a path of exile, without a place to call home or a clear status at court. At first, the English government did not know how to treat a young widow, the granddaughter of Queen Isabella. Her allowances were reduced to a meagre stipend. She had no private residence, and only a handful of loyal servants remained by her side. She wore simple garments and had to mend and wash them herself. On bitter winter nights, with only a thin velvet dress, she wrapped herself in a shawl and nestled by the fireplace in her cramped quarters within the chilly palace walls. 7 silent years passed from April in the year 1502 until June in the year 1508, during which Catherine existed in limbo, like a boat adrift on an endless sea with no harbour. She patched her tattered clothes, her few attendants were recalled at royal command, and food was often scarce. Many nights she prayed until dawn, listening to the mournful wind and the relentless pounding of waves against her window. On some mornings she awoke to utter darkness, her spirit sinking as though it might turn to ash. Yet neither will nor duty permitted her to waver. From an early age, under Queen Isabella's tutelage, Catherine had been trained for governance. She mastered Latin, studied philosophy, history, and politics. She understood that she was more than a girl wed to a prince. She was the living emblem of an alliance between two kingdoms. Thus, even in hardship, she maintained her regal bearing, sitting with a straight back, wearing a simple pearl necklace, and reading devotional texts each morning. On the 11th of June in the year 1508, Arthur's younger brother, Prince Henry, ascended the throne at exactly 17 years of age. At the coronation ceremony in Westminster Abbey, Henry donned a resplendent royal robe, the flickering candles illuminating his path with golden light. When he beheld Catherine, now 23 years old, with her gentle beauty and steadfast gaze, he saw not only a political match, but a partner of virtue, wisdom, and grace. Less than a week later, on the 18th of June in the year 1508, Henry and Catherine were married in the chapel of our founder. Their union received papal approval, since Catherine's first marriage had never been consummated, thus opening a new chapter in a love story said to be both sweet and powerful. From that moment, Catherine ceased to be a wandering widow and became Queen of England, bearing hopes and responsibilities greater than any she had known before. After their wedding, Catherine of Aragon swiftly established herself as a true queen. From the first weeks of her marriage in June of the year 1508, she took part in council meetings, offering Henry counsel on matters of statecraft. She had mastered Latin, studied philosophy and theology, and even composed memoranda on revenue and defence. When the sweating sickness swept through London in the summer of 1510, claiming thousands of lives, Catherine stood beside her husband, organising hospitals, delivering alms to the afflicted, and praying with infected families in makeshift infirmaries. Her devotion bolstered the spirits of courtiers and commoners alike, who began to view her not merely as a foreign princess, but as a protector of the realm. In the autumn of 1511, a rebellion erupted in northern England. Noble houses disaffected by Henry's taxation rose in arms, and rumours swirled that the Scots might exploit the unrest. With her husband away leading troops, Catherine assumed the regency. Clad in a simple red surcoat over her gown, she sat at the high table of Westminster Hall, pen in hand. She signed ordinances to raise levies, dispatched envoys to negotiate truces, and issued proclamations that balanced firmness with mercy. When news arrived of a Scottish incursion, Catherine did not hesitate. She dispatched a courier bearing the blood-stained coat of the captured Scottish earl, proclaiming England's victory. The gesture, both practical and symbolic, cemented her reputation as a warrior queen in the eyes of the people. Yet it was in her chambers that Catherine bore her greatest grief. Between the years 1510 and 1517, she endured no fewer than 6 pregnancies. Each time hope blossomed in her heart, only to wither in tragedy. In the spring of 1512, she delivered a son who lived but a day. In the winter of 1513, another baby boy took his first breath and then slipped away before dawn. Each loss was a private torment. Catherine wept silent tears into her pillows, whispering prayers for her unborn children, even as she comforted Henry through his own sorrow. Amid these bereavements, only one child survived infancy. Mary, born on the 18th of February, in the year 1516. Catherine cradled her daughter close, addressing her as the bright star of England, yet every milestone was tinged with anxiety. When Mary's first birthday arrived, Catherine knelt in chapel and gave thanks, but she still feared that God's favour would wane, and that the future of the Tudor line would be imperilled. Even so, Catherine never succumbed to bitterness. In the face of repeated heartbreak, she continued to fulfil her duties with unshakable faith. In the chapels and cloisters of Westminster, she fasted and attended matins at dawn. At council gatherings, she spoke calmly of policy and precedent, never revealing the ache in her heart. Her piety, combined with her evident intelligence, won the admiration of London's citizens. Ballads circulated extolling her gentle wisdom and steadfast virtue, and merchants left offerings of wheat and wine at her residence, hoping for continued royal favour. But as Catherine's star rose among the people, a shadow began to lengthen in Henry's regard. At first it was subtle, a missed glance, a curt reply, a delayed summons to dinner. Yet over time, those small slights became a persistent chill. By the year 1517, courtiers whispered that the king, once playful and warm, now seemed distant in council chambers. Catherine, ever hopeful, attributed his aloofness to the burdens of kingship, the constant threat of foreign invasion, the weight of taxation, the endless calculations of alliances. She assured herself that her steadfastness would rekindle his affection, and for a while, it seemed to work. At the end of that year, Henry praised Catherine's stewardship of the northern counties, acknowledging her worthy counsel in a proclamation to the realm. The court celebrated with a masque in her honour, and for a moment the glow returned to their partnership. Yet beneath the pageantry, a growing frustration lurked. Henry's desire for a male heir remained unfulfilled, and in his eyes, Catherine's cursed womb had failed its purpose. Though she had given her all her loyalty, her counsel, her very body, she could not produce the son he so fervently sought. Thus, in the hush of candlelit halls, and beside the roar of palace hearths, Catherine of Aragon continued her service. Queen, counsellor, mother, warrior in prayer, but her sovereign's heart had begun to stray, and the first signs of frost settled upon the love that once burned so brightly. In the stillness before the storm, Catherine held fast to her faith and her duty, even as the tides of favour began to recede. The bond between Catherine and Henry VIII began to fracture as the years of loss and sorrow wore on. Each time Catherine endured the agony of miscarriage or stillbirth, Henry retreated further into himself. After the spring of 1512, when her newborn son lived but one day, and again in the winter of 1513, when another boy slipped away before dawn, the king's warmth turned to icy silence. Meals once shared in laughter and conversation became hushed affairs. Catherine sat at the high table in the candlelit hall, her heart trembling at the lack of greeting in Henry's gaze. The echo of her footsteps across the stone floor seemed louder than any words he might have spoken. Henry's absence grew more pronounced with each passing season. He embarked on prolonged hunting expeditions across the woods of Surrey and the forests of Windsor, leaving Catherine to preside over court alone. Courtiers exchanged wary glances as the king's carriage disappeared beyond the palace gates, commenting in low tones that the king deserves more than this, and hinting at intrigues among the ladies of his household. Despite the rumours and the mounting distance between them, Catherine refused to harbour resentment. Instead, she knelt in the privacy of her oratory, hands clasped, her prayers rising like incense. For Henry's peace of mind, for reconciliation, and for the grace to endure. Outside the royal apartments, whispers grew into a constant murmur. Some spoke of Henry's favour shifting to other companions. Others claimed he sought solace in the company of gentlewomen who understood his burdens. Whether these tales were true, or mere court gossip, their persistence wounded Catherine more deeply than any public rebuke could. Yet she held fast to her belief that the bond sealed by God at their marriage would draw her husband back to her side. She reminded herself daily of the sacred vows exchanged before the altar on the 18th of June in the year 1508, trusting that divine providence would not abandon their union. Unbeknownst to Catherine, however, Henry had already begun laying the groundwork for their marital dissolution. The process was neither abrupt nor announced with pomp. Rather, it unfolded in secret letters to foreign dignitaries, in discreet meetings with theologians, and in the drafting of petitions to the Holy See. His desire for a male heir, an unquenched thirst by that point, drove him to consult canon lawyers and scholars of Levitical law. He argued, in muted correspondence, that the scriptures forbade a man from marrying his brother's widow, citing that such a union would render them childless. Henry's council, tasked with securing a declaration of nullity, prepared dossiers filled with precedents and testimonies, all while Catherine remained convinced of her rightful place at his side. The king's resolve solidified when he instructed that Catherine be forbidden from approaching their daughter, Princess Mary, whom Catherine had borne on the 18th of February in the year 1516. The edict arrived in Catherine's private study as a sealed parchment, its ink still moist. Mary was to be declared illegitimate, deprived of her title, and denied contact with her mother. The blow struck Catherine like a dagger to the heart. Without tears, she read the proclamation, then folded the letter and placed it upon her prayer desk. In that moment, the weight of royal displeasure pressed upon her like a physical force. Yet she did not kneel in supplication or rage in protest. Instead, she rose, adjusted the simple pearl necklace at her throat, and continued her devotions, trusting that truth and faith would endure beyond the king's decree. To the onlookers at court, Catherine's unwavering composure seemed almost otherworldly. Where one might expect despair or angry retort, she offered only silent prayer. When summoned to the Privy Council to hear the charges against her, she entered the chamber dressed in sombre blue, her countenance calm, and declared in measured tones that she remained the lawful and true wife of Henry VIII and Queen of England. The room fell silent at her words, every nobleman's gaze fixed upon her resolute figure. Yet behind the facade of royal dignity, Catherine's heart trembled. She knew that, in Henry's eyes, her role as queen was slipping away like sand through an hourglass, and that her daughter's future was being cast into uncertainty. Night after night, Catherine lay in her cold chamber at Kimbolton Castle, listening to the windlash against the windows and the distant toll of the chapel bell. There, in the hush of darkness, she offered up her final prayers for Henry's soul and for Mary's restoration. She begged mercy for the man who had once adored her, and for the little girl whose fate he had sought to erase. And though the path ahead remained shrouded in sorrow, Catherine clung to the conviction that her steadfast faith and unwavering loyalty, even in the face of rejection, would one day vindicate her name and restore her daughter's rightful place. In the spring of 1527, when Catherine was already over 40 years old, and her body had been weakened by one miscarriage after another, King Henry VIII formally demanded an annulment of their marriage. He invoked the ancient decree from the book of Leviticus. If a man shall take his brother's wife, it is an unclean thing. He hath uncovered his brother's nakedness. They shall be childless. To persuade Pope Clement VII that the union between himself and Catherine had been forbidden from the start. This argument rested upon the claim that Catherine had been the widow of his elder brother Arthur, and that, according to divine law, any offspring of such a marriage would be cursed with barrenness. Henry's counsellors prepared the king's suit in Rome, filing petitions and treatises that argued the marriage had never been consummated and therefore lacked validity. Catherine, though frail in health, met this challenge without retreat. In a calm yet resolute voice, she declared before the Privy Council in London, "I was never truly wedded to Prince Arthur, and God himself bears witness to the legitimacy of my marriage to King Henry." Those words echoed through the vaulted halls of Whitehall Palace on the 17th of December in the year 1527, the very eve of Catherine's 42nd birthday. The court fell silent as the Queen insisted on her status. She remained the lawful Queen of England until either divine or papal decree officially dissolved their bond. Thus commenced a legal struggle that would last for years, spanning the red-walled tribunals of Rome and the grand chambers of Westminster. Envoys travelled between London and Avignon, bearing letters sealed with the royal signet, entreaties to the Holy Father, and volumes of testimony. In the summer of 1528, Cardinal Wolsey presided over a hearing at Blackfriars in London, convened under duress of the king, hoping to secure a favourable judgment. Catherine herself appeared in person on the 26th of June, kneeling before the bench of judges in a chamber lit by flickering torches. There she repeated her solemn vow. "I am the true and lawful wife of the king, and no earthly power may annul what God has joined." Under mounting pressure, Catherine was moved from one royal residence to another, in a pattern designed to isolate her and diminish her influence. From Greenwich Palace to the Tower of London, then on to Ampthill House, her entourage dwindled. Where once she had enjoyed the company of 100 attendants, by the autumn of 1529, she was served by no more than a dozen loyal ladies in waiting. Her chambers grew sparse. Tapestries were removed, leaving cold stone walls. The silver plate from her table was returned to the royal kitchens, and her garments, once woven from the finest Flemish cloth, were exchanged for simpler gowns of wool. On winter nights, Catherine would wrap herself in a single cloak and sit by the hearth, her breath rising in pale clouds as she prayed. Despite such privations, Catherine's resolve never faltered. Each morning at dawn, she rose to attend Mass in her modest oratory, the light of the rising sun filtering through narrow windows. She recited the same prayers she had learned in her youth, drawing strength from the Psalms. When courtiers visited, they found her gracious but mournful, her voice steady, even when tears shimmered upon her lashes. She wrote letters to her nephew, the Emperor Charles V, appealing for his support. She dispatched missives to European courts, reminding them of the alliance between Spain and England. Her penmanship, once celebrated for its elegance, now bore the tremor of years of sorrow, yet each word shone with unwavering dignity. Throughout the winter of 1530, rumours circulated that the Pope might finally grant Henry's request. In response, Catherine prepared a final plea to Rome, arguing that the king's true motive was not divine obedience but a desire for a male heir and a new, more politically advantageous marriage. This document, over 100 pages long, meticulously argued, was carried by a trusted envoy to Rome in a courier's pouch, travelling over the Alps and across the Italian plains. It reached the papal court in the spring of 1531, where Catherine's cause was considered alongside the looming threat of a French invasion. Back in England, Catherine's kneeling in public before the king became a recurring spectacle. On the 30th of July, in the year 1532, she knelt on the marble floor of the banqueting house at Whitehall, surrounded by nobles and ambassadors. As she rose, she gazed directly at Henry, asserting one final time, "I am your true and lawful wife, the Queen of England, as long as I live, and until God's judgment separates us." The ceremony, intended by Henry to humiliate her, instead transformed into a testament to her unwavering faith and her claim to legitimacy. Thus, over the course of nearly 5 years, Catherine endured the ebb and flow of political fortune. In the face of diminishing comfort and relentless opposition, she maintained her vow before God and man. Though the king had set in motion the machinery of annulment, Catherine stood firm, kneeling in the dust and rising with her head held high, a living reminder that marriage, once consecrated by divine authority, could not be undone by mere royal decree. In the bitter winter of the year 1536, Catherine of Aragon lay dying in exile at Kimbolton Castle. Snow fell steadily beyond the narrow high windows, each flake drifting past the cold glass like a silent witness to her final days. The castle's stone walls offered only scant warmth. Catherine's chamber was draughty, the tapestries long removed, and the hearth's embers scarcely glowed. Many sources believe she suffered from cancer of the heart or stomach, a disease that left her weak and often vomiting black bile. By late January of that year she could no longer stand, and even speaking cost her breath and strength. Alone in her small suite, bereft of friends or courtly company, Catherine clung only to her faith and, in her last hours, to her pen. No grand ladies in waiting remained. Those few who attended to her needs did so more out of duty than affection. The chaplain who visited had to report back to the crown each day, his footsteps echoing in empty corridors as he left. Catherine's silver plate and fine linen had been stripped away weeks earlier, leaving her to dine on plain bread and broth. Yet in that solitude, the Queen found clarity. She resolved to address Henry one final time, not in anger or recrimination, but in forgiveness and love. On the 3rd of February, Catherine summoned a scribe and dictated her last letter to the man who had been both her husband and her cause of greatest sorrow. With hands weakened by illness, she wrote, "Mine eyes desire you above all things. I make this vow, that mine is the hand of a faithful wife and loving soul. I forgive you everything." She addressed him as "my most dear lord and husband," a phrase heavy with both affection and reproach-affection for the bond they had once shared, reproach for the suffering he had caused her. She begged him, "For the sake of our daughter Mary, be a good father unto her," reminding him that Mary, born on the 18th of February in the year 1516, remained his child despite Henry's decree declaring her illegitimate. In closing, Catherine reaffirmed her unbroken status. She was still his lawful wife and the true Queen of England, until God himself should decree otherwise. When Henry received the letter, its gentle force struck him profoundly. Though he refused to reverse his decision, he ordered that Catherine's funeral be held at Peterborough Cathedral, allowing for a public rite of passage, even as he maintained that she should not rest with the honours of a queen. On the day of her death, believed to be the 7th of January, the very month and near the anniversary of her arrival in England 28 years earlier, Henry appeared before his courtiers clad in yellow, the Spanish colour of mourning. Some whispered that he followed the custom of Catherine's homeland. Others claimed he celebrated her demise. Yet beneath the public display simmered the knowledge that Catherine's final act, with pen and parchment, had left an indelible mark on his conscience. Her coffin, simple and unadorned, travelled from Kimbolton Castle to Peterborough Abbey on a cold February morn, flanked by a handful of clerics and loyal servants. No crown rested upon its lid, no heraldic banner trailed behind. She was buried under the title Princess of Wales, a stark reminder that her status as queen had been stripped even in death. Still, word of her calm dignity spread quickly. Women in London donned black in secret, Spanish ambassadors wept openly, and clandestine masses were held in her honour despite royal prohibitions. In life and death, Catherine of Aragon remained unbowed, a queen whose final letter embodied both her inner strength and enduring mercy, a testament to the boundless power of forgiveness, even amid exile and sorrow. After Catherine's letter reached him, Henry VIII appeared profoundly moved. Although he steadfastly refused to allow her burial with the status of a queen, He nevertheless commanded a sumptuous funeral service at Peterborough Cathedral in January of the year 1536. The King's proclamation, issued on the 20th of January, instructed that the ceremony be conducted with all due solemnity, save for the traditional royal honours reserved solely for a crowned monarch. Courtiers and chroniclers noted with fascination that Henry arrived at the cathedral wearing garments of bright yellow, the hue of mourning according to Spanish custom, its vivid warmth incongruous against the chill of an English winter. Some onlookers interpreted his attire as a sign of genuine grief, while others whispered that the king, ever capricious, might even be celebrating the final removal of his wife from his life. Yet behind the public pageantry lay a deeper truth. Catherine's final missive had pierced the royal heart. It was not a cry of despair, but a testament of inner sovereignty, a quiet assertion of loyalty and forgiveness, so unyielding that it undermined the very foundations of Henry's authority. What kind of man, courtiers murmured, destroys a devoted wife, and still receives her grace in return? In whispered conversations outside the palace gates, they noted that, even in death, the Queen commands more sorrow than the King himself. All of London seemed to don mourning. Women draped themselves in black veils, their hair concealed, as they passed through the city streets in subdued processions. Merchants closed their shutters at midday and observed moments of silence. In the Spanish embassy, dignitaries remained silent over their cups of tea, refusing the customary toasts in the king's honour. Beneath these gestures lay a potent mixture of genuine sorrow and political statement. Catherine's memory had become a rallying symbol for those who disdained Henry's religious reforms and his treatment of his first wife. Perhaps most heartrending of all was the impact on Mary, Catherine's only surviving child. Mary Tudor, aged 20, was neither informed of her mother's demise in a timely fashion, nor permitted to attend the funeral rites. On the 30th of January, while the stone arches of Peterborough echoed with chant and prayer, Mary sat confined within the walls of Hatfield House, learning of her mother's death through a brief dispatch. The arrival of the missive left her reeling. The parchment trembled in her hand as tears blurred the ink. That afternoon, a small group of her attendants, and not the full retinue one might expect for a princess, presented her with the details of the service. Mary's heart fractured not only by the loss of her mother, but by the cruel denial of her filial duty. In the solitude of her chamber, Mary dressed herself in a simple black gown, cinched at the waist, and wrapped a sable cloak about her shoulders. She wrote a short note to her aunt, the Dowager Duchess of Suffolk, beseeching guidance and comfort, yet confessing her despair. "Never have I felt so broken, deprived not only of my mother's life, but of the chance to kneel by her bier and bid her farewell." Her silent tears fell onto the vellum, blotting words of grief she could no longer contain. Meanwhile, at Peterborough Cathedral, the funeral service proceeded under a canopy of silence, punctuated by the tolling of bells. The Archbishop of Canterbury delivered a eulogy that balanced dignity with restraint, praising Catherine's steadfast virtue and her devotion to both God and King. The procession of clergy, noble mourners, and a handful of Catherine's former attendants wound through the nave. Their footsteps sounded muffled by the thick rugs laid before the wooden coffin. A plain brass plaque on the lid read simply, "Princess of Wales," omitting the title Queen, as per Henry's decree. Yet the poignancy of that omission only heightened the sense of injustice felt by those who bore witness. Back in Westminster, courtiers and ambassadors shared hushed reflections on the meaning of Catherine's death. Many agreed that, in laying her to rest with the honours afforded to a prince's widow rather than a queen, Henry had unwittingly immortalized her as a martyr to marital fidelity. Her letter was her sword, one bishop confided to a visitor from France, and her grace a shield that even the king could not shatter. Reports reached Rome of the foreign-born queen's dignified end, further complicating the Pope's stance on Henry's annulment petition. As Mary stood in her far-off chamber, the distant sounds of Peterborough's psalms still ringing in her ears, she made a silent vow that one day she would restore her mother's rightful place in history and on the roll of England's sovereigns. But for now, in the bleak midwinter of 1536, the echoes of Catherine's life and of that final, forgiving letter reverberated through the corridors of power and the hearts of all who mourned her. In death as in life, Catherine of Aragon remained unbowed, her legacy defined not by the titles denied her, but by the enduring strength of a queen's steadfast faith and love. Catherine was laid to rest in a simple coffin, no royal mantle, no crown. Her tombstone bearing only the title Princess of Wales, rather than Queen of England. This final indignity marked the last slight against a woman who had sacrificed her youth and her heart for a foreign realm. Yet the news of her unceremonious burial spread swiftly across Europe, carrying with it a wave of sorrow and indignation. In Madrid, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain dispatched solemn missives of condolence to the English court, lamenting the fate of their daughter. Spanish ambassadors in London donned black armbands for weeks, foregoing all courtly revelry in deference to Catherine's memory. Meanwhile, clandestine masses were held in England's abbeys and priories, secret assemblies of monks and nuns who defied royal edicts to pray for the repose of Catherine's soul. Word circulated that even the most hardened scribes and chroniclers found their pens weighed down by grief. Some likened the collective mourning to the passing of Emperor Charles V, while others claimed it surpassed all sorrow felt at the death of King Henry II. Poets composed laments in Latin and English, their verses echoing through the corridors of Whitehall and beyond. One anonymous balladeer penned, "No jewel gleams upon her bier, no sceptre graces her hand, yet England weeps a queen, sincere, whose faith outshone the land." These elegies circulated by candlelight, copied onto scraps of parchment, and shared in hushed tones among courtiers. In the narrow alleys of London, women draped in black shawls pressed wreaths of yew and rosemary against the walls of sacred chapels, invoking Catherine's name in whispered prayers. At Kimbolton Castle, the handful of servants who had tended Catherine in her final illness were themselves reduced to tears. They recalled her gentle authority, her tireless charity, and the calm dignity with which she faced every trial. Stories of her nightly devotions, a solitary silhouette kneeling by a dim lantern, became legend among the castle's keepers. Back in London, the king observed these ceremonies with a curious mix of resolve and regret. Though he had refused Catherine's right to be interred as a queen, he could not entirely silence the outpouring of devotion. On the day of the funeral procession, a solemn cortege accompanied Catherine's body from London to Peterborough, the route lined with mourners in silent homage. Even some members of the court, long estranged from Catherine's cause, found themselves pausing their duties to lower their heads in respect as the hearse passed. Her daughter Mary, the only child surviving Catherine's many pregnancies, was neither informed in time nor permitted to attend the funeral. Born on the 18th of February, in the year 1516, Mary had been declared illegitimate by royal decree. Denied the chance to bid farewell to her mother, Mary endured a private grief that would shape her future reign. A kingdom once cold to her birthright would one day be reminded of Catherine's legacy through her daughter's piety. Years later, when Mary ascended the throne as Queen Mary I of England, she set to work restoring her mother's honour. She issued a royal proclamation reinstating Catherine's title as Queen of England, and ordered a new inscription for her mother's tomb at Peterborough Cathedral. Where once the stone had read Princess of Wales, it now proclaimed Catherine, Queen of England, faithful wife and servant of God. Mary also established an annual day of remembrance on the 7th of January, marking the date of her mother's burial, during which clergy throughout the realm were instructed to offer prayers for Catherine's soul. Through these acts, Mary ensured that Catherine's sacrifices would never be forgotten. The simple coffin and the austere tombstone became symbols of a queen whose true majesty lay not in crowns or titles, but in unwavering faith and dignity. In every whispered prayer, in every verse penned by grieving poets, Catherine of Aragon lived on her memory, honoured by a daughter who knew all too well the cost of love and loyalty. On the 19th of July in the year 1553, Mary Tudor ascended the English throne as Mary I, determined to restore the Catholic faith that her father had severed. Clad in mourning black from the moment of her coronation, she vowed to honour her mother, Catherine of Aragon, whose death nearly 2 decades earlier had been shrouded in indignity. For 7 full years, until her own death on the 17th of November in the year 1558, Mary kept to her funeral attire, heavy black damask gowns, veils that draped to the floor, and a simple black rosary always in hand. Her courtiers noted that she rarely smiled and moved through court processions as if still walking beside her mother's bier. Within months of her accession, on the 3rd of November in the year 1553, Mary issued a royal proclamation ordering the construction of a memorial at Peterborough Cathedral, the very site where Catherine had been laid to rest, under the title Princess of Wales. The decree specified that the monument be raised in the chapter house, a space consecrated by the echoes of Mass for centuries. Master Mason William Harrington was commissioned to design a tomb chest of white Purbeck marble, carved with Catherine's royal arms, and a brass effigy depicting her in full regalia, hands clasped in prayer. Work began in the spring of 1554 and was completed by Michaelmas of that same year, ensuring that Catherine would at last lie beneath an emblem befitting her station as Queen of England. Concurrently, Mary restored the daily celebration of the Mass at the chapel dedicated to Catherine's memory. On the Feast of the Epiphany in January of 1554, she personally attended the first of these services, processing up the nave in solemn step, surrounded by bishops and Spanish ambassadors who wept openly at the Latin intonation of the Requiem Aeternam. Each day thereafter, priests in black cassocks offered the Eucharist at dawn, chanting the same prayers that Catherine had once recited in her exile. By midsummer, the relics of Saints Richard and Chad, venerated in the cathedral's crypt, were brought into the chapel to populate the altarpiece with sanctity and to underscore the spiritual import of the restoration. News of these acts spread swiftly through Europe. In Rome, Cardinal Reginald Pole, Mary's cousin and principal advisor, hailed the campaign as a model for reunifying Christendom. Spanish ambassadors in Paris reported that Mary's unwavering devotion to her mother's memory had won her the deep gratitude of King Philip II of Spain, to whom she was later wed on the 25th of July in the year 1554. Philip, arriving in England clad in mourning likewise, placed his Scottish crown beside Catherine's tomb in a gesture of solidarity and reverence. Across the continent, printers in Antwerp and Venice circulated pamphlets praising Catherine's steadfast virtue and Mary's filial piety, describing the cathedral's new monument as a beacon of loyalty and faith. Within England, public sentiment mirrored the continent's admiration. In London's Guildhall, aldermen dedicated a stained glass window to Catherine's likeness, showing her kneeling before the Virgin Mary, crowned yet humble. Beneath the glass, an inscription read, "To Catherine of Aragon, whose faith did not falter, and to Mary I, whose heart remained steadfast in black." Merchants contributed funds to purchase candles that would burn perpetually at Catherine's tomb, their wax dripping like tears for the late Queen. In rural parishes, priests delivered sermons on Catherine's life each Lent, using her example to exhort congregations to resist the allure of Protestant doctrine and to embrace the sacraments anew. For Mary herself, the memorial campaign was more than politics, it was the fulfillment of a daughter's promise. She frequently visited Peterborough Cathedral in person, slipping through the cloisters in the hush before dawn. There she knelt by the tomb, reciting the Salve Regina and the Stabat Mater, her voice low and rhythmic as the toll of the cathedral bell. On the 30th of August in the year 1557, when the work on the chapel was declared complete, Mary laid a wreath of Spanish rosemary and English primrose at Catherine's feet. The combined fragrance of both homelands drifted through the stone aisle, uniting mother and daughter in a final act of devotion. By the end of Mary's reign, the legacy of Catherine of Aragon had been fully vindicated. The restored liturgies, the marble monument, and the annual commemorations ensured that Catherine's name would never fade from memory. In the eyes of Mary's subjects, both Catholic and those inclined toward the new faith, Catherine's story stood as a testament to the power of unwavering duty and of love that transcends even the severest trials. And so, in the quiet shadows of Peterborough's chapter house, beneath the arch of its ancient roof, Catherine of Aragon found at last the recognition she had been denied in life, a queen at peace in death, honoured by a daughter whose own reign was defined by loyalty, faith, and the promise kept to the very end. The legacy of Catherine of Aragon extends far beyond the shores of England, weaving its way into the literature, art, and music of later centuries. She is remembered as the young princess who braved storm-tossed seas for love, the powerful queen who could not overcome the politics of separation, and the dignified exile whose final act of mercy reverberated through history. In the realm of literature, Catherine's life has inspired countless novels and poems. Joanna Denny's historical biography, Catherine the Queen, published in 2003, re-examines her life through letters and contemporary sources, emphasizing her intellect and piety. Philippa Gregory's novel, The Constant Princess, published in 2005, offers a richly imagined portrait, casting Catherine as a heroine who navigates court intrigue with courage and wit. Poets from the Romantic era onward have found in Catherine's story a poignant symbol of loyalty betrayed. In the early 19th century, an anonymous poet published "To Catherine," desperate in exile, in a London literary magazine, mourning her solitude and affirming her moral strength. Visual artists, too, have repeatedly turned to Catherine's image. In one of the most famous Tudor portraits, painted circa 1534 by Hans Holbein the Younger, Catherine appears dignified in black velvet, her gaze calm yet resolute, a silent testament to her endurance. That likeness inspired later generations of painters. In 1847, Sir Charles Eastlake exhibited a large canvas titled Catherine of Aragon at Kimbolton, depicting her sitting by a flickering candle, pen in hand, as snow falls outside. In the 20th century, dramatists and scenographers for the television series The Tudors, aired from 2007 to 2010, drew heavily on Holbein's imagery, presenting Catherine in sumptuous gowns against stark stone interiors, her gravity underscored by the soundtrack's minor chords. Music has also echoed Catherine's story. In 1536, Spanish court composers wrote laments, sacred motets in Latin, honoring her steadfast faith. Unfortunately, the original manuscripts have not survived. However, in the early 21st century, composer John McCabe set to music a modern cycle of Elizabethan-style madrigals titled Letters from Kimbolton, premiering in London in 2014. Texts drawn from Catherine's final letter provided the libretto, lending the work an intimate connection to her voice. The soprano sings lines such as, "Mine eyes desire you above all things," over a gentle harpsichord accompaniment, evoking the hush of her dying hours. Historians often cite Catherine as the quintessential Renaissance woman, a figure who combined political acumen with spiritual devotion, courtly elegance with personal sacrifice. In her study, Queenship and Power, published in 1987, scholar Anna Whitelock describes Catherine as unique in her era, both a prince's bride and a ruler in her own right, fluent in Latin and theology, yet bound by the constraints of her sex and station. Such assessments underscore Catherine's dual identity. She was at once a foreign princess, trained for governance in the Spanish court, and a queen who ruled England in her husband's absence, only to be cast aside when she failed to produce a male heir. Filmmakers and playwrights have seized on that tragedy to critique the inhumanity of political marriages. Shakespeare's play Henry VIII, believed written around 1612, dramatizes Catherine's plight in a brief but powerful scene. She kneels before Cardinal Wolsey, protesting that her marriage to Henry was lawful and blessed by the Pope. Though Shakespeare grants her only a few lines, later stage productions amplify her voice, giving her extended monologues that lament her exile and plead for her dignity. In modern theatre, Maxwell Anderson's Anne of the Thousand Days, first performed in 1937, incorporates Catherine as a secondary yet morally pivotal character, juxtaposing her steadfast faith with Anne Boleyn's ambition. Film adaptations, most notably the 2018 movie The Spanish Princess, based on Gregory's novels, portray Catherine as a sympathetic figure whose faith and intelligence challenge the rigid gender norms of her time. Across these mediums, the story of Catherine of Aragon endures as a cautionary tale and a source of inspiration, a reminder of the human cost of dynastic politics, and a testament to the power of personal conviction. Whether in verse, on canvas, or through musical lament, Catherine's image, once a young princess crossing stormy seas, remains a powerful emblem of loyalty, resilience, and the quiet fortitude of a woman determined to live and die with unwavering grace. After Queen Mary I restored her mother's honour, Catherine of Aragon's image transcended mere mortal memory to become a sacred emblem in the hearts of English subjects and throughout Catholic Europe. No longer was she remembered simply as a departed queen. She had been transformed into an icon of soft power, a weapon that wielded influence not by sword or decree, but by the force of moral authority that even the king and his council could not easily dismiss. Long after her burial at Peterborough in January of the year 1536, Catherine's signature Catherine, the true and lawful Queen of England, continued to appear on letters and petitions smuggled into court. Each time her name and title were invoked, they served as a final challenge to King Henry VIII's attempts to erase her legacy. Courtiers who had once whispered in private now found themselves speaking of Catherine's authority with reverence, acknowledging that no royal proclamation could undo the legitimacy she had claimed, nor the spiritual pact she had sealed with God. In artistic depictions that followed, Catherine was almost invariably portrayed, seated at a writing desk, her frail form illuminated by the soft glow of a single candle. In such paintings from the early 17th century altarpieces in Spanish cathedrals to the oil portraits in England's Guildhall, her face is serene and unwavering, her pen poised above parchment, as if in the very act of inscribing her final testament. These images captured the moment she shed the mantle of victimhood and assumed the mantle of narrative master, the woman who had dared to define the truth of her own story. That final letter, mere paragraphs, yet resonant with unwavering compassion, was copied, recopied, and disseminated across royal libraries in London and Toledo. Scholars in the royal scriptorium carefully transcribed the lines, "Mine eyes desire you above all things. I make this vow that mine is the hand of a faithful wife and loving soul. I forgive you everything." In each transcription, the Latin translations appeared alongside the English, reflecting Catherine's bilingual erudition and underscoring her role as a bridge between two great Christian kingdoms. Beyond visual arts and manuscripts, Catherine's legacy infused the liturgy itself. In the reign of Mary I, special prayers for Catherine were inserted into the prayers for the dead, and hymns composed in her honour became fixtures of conventual choirs. In the summer of the year 1555, the Abbey Choir at Westminster performed a motet titled Regina Sine Diadema, a Queen Without a Crown, its mournful harmonies tracing Catherine's journey from sovereign glory to humble exile. Monasteries across France and Italy commissioned versions of the motet, ensuring that Catherine's memory would resonate in every Christian court and cathedral. Court historians of the late 16th century extolled Catherine as a paragon of Renaissance womanhood, politically astute, theologically learned, and unflinchingly pious. In the treatise De Reginae Virtutibus, published in Venice in the year 1562, the author praised her as the one and only queen whose spiritual sovereignty outlasted the thrones of temporal kings. The book's circulation among Italian princes and Spanish grandees further cemented her posthumous reputation. On stages in both England and abroad, dramatists used Catherine's final letter as the emotional climax of plays exploring the perils of dynastic marriage. In the court masque presented at Whitehall in the year 1557, an actress playing Catherine entered in widow's weeds, approached a gilded desk, and recited the letter in a whisper so compelling that even the chattering courtiers fell silent. The masque's composer wove her words into a plaintive lute madrigal, and the lords and ladies wept as one, moved by the Queen's transcendent grace. Thus, the small, ailing woman who died in exile achieved a power that no army could muster and no edict could revoke. For 24 years from the day she crossed the sea at Plymouth to her death at Kimbleton, Catherine's life had been entwined with the fate of kingdoms. Yet it was in her death that her soft power shone most brightly, not through vengeance or coercion, but through the absolute force of forgiveness and the authority of a written word. In every candlelit chapel where her likeness appeared, in every transcription of her letter, and in every whispered prayer that bore her name, Catherine of Aragon lived on as a queen who commanded the conscience of Christendom. Her legacy stood as a testament to the indomitable spirit of a woman who, despite exile, illness, and betrayal, fashioned from her final breath an unassailable claim to dignity, justice, and unwavering love. The echo of Catherine's final revenge letter resounded through literature and history as a truly heroic chapter. Scholars have long observed that her defiance was not wrought with fury or bitter argument, but rather with a calm appeal to conscience, what one historian termed the most exquisite form of revenge. In placing Henry VIII before two stark choices to acknowledge his wrongdoing and reconcile with the woman he had cast, aside, or to persist in self-imposed isolation from public sentiment, Catherine harnessed a power more profound than any royal decree. Contemporary accounts suggest that, in the days following Catherine's funeral in January of the year 1536, court gossip was rife with tales of the king's solitude. Chronicler Edward Hall noted in his union of the two noble and illustrious families of Lancaster and York that His Majesty did retire off to his private chamber, where he did unfold and refold that unhappy letter from his late queen, each reading stirring both ire and remorse in his heart. According to Hall, the letter's gentle yet unwavering tone haunted the king more than any censure from Parliament or papal envoy. Each time he revisited her words, "Mine eyes desire you above all things. I forgive you everything." He confronted the stark contrast between her mercy and his own ruthless ambition. By the spring of 1537, rumours began to surface that Henry's governance had taken on a somewhat softened edge. While it is indisputable that he continued the dissolution of the monasteries, historians like G.R. Elton in his Policy and Police, published in 1963, argue that some of Henry's later proclamations exhibited a newfound concern for the common weal. For example, the Act of 27 Henry VIII, enacted in November of the year 1535 to regulate alehouses, contained more moderate provisions than earlier statutes. Punishments for unlicensed taverns were less severe, offering fines in lieu of corporal penalties. Similarly, the Subsidy Act of February, in the year 1537, provided relief for poorer parishes by reducing the rate for the poorest tenth of taxpayers, a small mercy, but one that contemporaries attributed to Henry's late conscience. Although these modifications were never officially linked to Catherine's letter, scholars such as Susan Doran have speculated that the king's personal reflections on his treatment of Catherine influenced his approach. In her biography Monarchy and Matrimony, published in 2003, Doran suggests that Henry's occasional gestures diminished severity in certain laws. Brief licenses for religious processions cannot be fully understood without acknowledging the profound moral reckoning prompted by Catherine's final testament. The notion that a single letter, written by a frail queen on her deathbed, could sway the policies of one of Europe's most formidable monarchs, underscores the enduring potency of Catherine's moral authority. Catherine's letter also achieved lasting prominence in literary works. In the early 17th century, dramatist John Ford penned a tragedy, The Uncrowned Queen, first performed in 1621, in which the character Queen Catherine delivers a monologue almost verbatim from Catherine's letter. Ford's play never became a household favourite, yet it cemented the idea of Catherine's words as an instrument of both tragic pathos and political indictment. Later, in the mid-18th century, Samuel Richardson referenced her letter in his epistolary novel Clarissa, drawing parallels between Clarissa's moral steadfastness and Catherine's unwavering virtue. Historians of the Victorian era further enshrined Catherine's legacy. Agnes Strickland, in her multi-volume series Lives of the Queens of England, published in the 1840s, devoted an entire chapter to the letter's impact. Strickland wrote, "Unlike the raging storm of war or the clangour of courtly strife, Catherine's final words arrived as a gentle rain upon the conscience of her husband, leaving a lasting harvest of reflection and regret. Her poetic phrasing helped popularise the image of Catherine as a saintly figure, whose spiritual victory outshone any temporal crown. Even outside England, Catherine's letter took on near-mythic status. In Spain, Jesuit theologians referenced it in sermons well into the 17th century, praising her as a model of Christian charity. Latin translations of her letter circulated in Jesuit colleges at Salamanca and Coimbra, teaching students that true power lay not in coercion, but in the grace of forgiveness. In French salons of the late 17th century, Catherine was often compared to Queen Zenobia of Palmyra, both exiled heroines who defied imperial might. Yet perhaps the most poignant tribute to Catherine's moral triumph came from within her own Tudor lineage. When Mary Tudor issued the final letters patent, recognising Catherine as the legitimate Queen of England in the year 1554, she invoked her mother's name and reproclaimed her as the unvanquished spirit, whose words endure when armies fall and kingdoms fade. Mary's act, though legal in form, carried the emotional weight of filial love and historical justice, echoing Catherine's letter's promise of unwavering loyalty. Thus, across centuries of scholarship, literature, and political discourse, the revenge letter has endured as a testament to the extraordinary force of moral conviction. In the gentle lines penned by a queen worn by exile and illness, Catherine of Aragon crafted a final, indelible statement that true power lies not in coercive might, but in the grace that binds human hearts, and the courage to stand by truth, even unto death. The saga of Catherine of Aragon and Henry VIII transcends a mere personal tragedy, It marks a turning point in both English history and the broader Christendom. When Henry sought an annulment in the mid-1520s and was rebuffed by Pope Clement VII, the king perceived the papacy's refusal not simply as a personal affront, but as an intolerable constraint on royal authority. On the 25th of May, in the year 1529, Parliament passed the First Act of Supremacy, declaring the king to be the supreme head of the Church of England, a title Henry would consolidate under statute on the 11th of April in the year 1531. These legislative measures severed England's ecclesiastical ties to Rome and inaugurated the English Reformation, a direct consequence, historians agree, of the protracted conflict over Catherine's marital status. Throughout this period, Catherine remained resolute in her adherence to Catholic doctrine. As she famously declared during the Blackfriars trial in June of the year 1528, "The law of God cannot be altered to satisfy the lust of man." That pronouncement, uttered in a London courtroom, encapsulated the wider struggle between temporal power and spiritual authority. Within her words lay the implicit challenge that Henry's yearning for a male heir could not override divine law. Even as the king amassed legions of commissioners and theologians to argue his cause, Catherine drew upon a lifetime of rigorous education, her facility in Latin, her study of Augustine and Aquinas, her familiarity with Roman law to defend both her own dignity and the broader principle of religious obedience. Henry's break with Rome undeniably reshaped the religious landscape of England. Monasteries and the wealth and lands they held were disbanded beginning in late 1536, under the dissolution, enriching the crown's coffers and empowering a new class of Protestant-leaning gentry. Yet the roots of that transformation lay in the king's insistence on ultimate authority, born of his dispute with Catherine. In the words of historian Diarmaid MacCulloch, the oath of supremacy, taken by thousands of clergy and laity in the year 1536, was the echo of Catherine's refusal to be cast aside without recourse to God's law. Despite her exile and illness, Catherine's example inspired those who remained loyal to Rome. Recusant families, those who refused to accept the new ecclesiastical order, often invoked her memory in private masses and devotional gatherings. In the early 1640s, when Mary I would later initiate her own efforts to restore Catholicism, she cited Catherine's steadfast faith as her model. The contrast between Henry's political pragmatism and Catherine's spiritual constancy underscored the complexity of the Reformation. It was not solely a doctrinal dispute, but also a clash between two visions of authority, one rooted in hereditary monarchy, the other in transcendent ecclesiology. Catherine herself exemplified the Renaissance ideal of an educated, politically engaged woman. From her arrival in England in November of the year 1501 until her final days in January of the year 1536, she demonstrated a facility with languages, a mastery of theology, and a keen grasp of statecraft. In her private library at Kimbleton, she owned copies of Cicero's De Officiis, Augustine's Confessions, and the Vulgate Bible, annotated in her own hand. These works informed her arguments before councils and jurists, allowing her to frame her marriage dispute within the broader legacy of classical and Christian thought. As scholar Susan Brigden has noted, Catherine's scholarship challenges any notion that women of her time were mere ornaments of court. She stands as a testament to the vital role learned women could play in shaping political and religious discourse. Artists and writers of later generations continued to highlight this intellectual dimension. In the 18th century, poet William Mason wrote an ode titled "To Catherine of Aragon," praising her learned mind and soul unbowed by tyrant's will. In the 19th century, the pre-Raphaelite painter George Frederick Watts depicted her at her desk, quill in hand, eyes fixed on an open book, an image that captured both her scholarly rigour and unbreakable resolve. Thus, the conflict between Henry and Catherine was never merely a royal quarrel. It underpinned the seismic shift of the English Reformation. Henry's assertion of supremacy disrupted the unity of Western Christendom, while Catherine's unwavering loyalty to Catholic teaching provided a moral counterpoint that resonated across Europe. Her life embodied the tension of the age, a woman of intellect and faith asserting her conscience against the tide of political expediency. In the annals of history, Catherine of Aragon remains not only a tragic queen but also a symbol of the enduring struggle between secular ambition and spiritual fidelity. Her legacy, a a reminder that even in exile and infirmity, the pen of conscience can wield a mightier power than the crown of state. The spiritual legacy of Catherine of Aragon continues to resonate through visual art and popular culture, a testament to the enduring power of her story. In the realm of painting, the most iconic depiction is Hans Holbein the Younger's oil portrait of Catherine, completed circa 1534. There she is shown seated at a desk, dressed in a black velvet gown with a high square neckline trimmed in pearls, her hands resting on an open book of hours. The soft candlelight captured by Holbein illuminates her thoughtful expression, suggesting both her scholarly mind and the weight of her private sorrow. That image has served as the prototype for countless artistic homages. In 1892, pre-Raphaelite artist Evelyn de Morgan painted Catherine in exile, portraying the Queen by a frosted window, quill in hand, her gaze lifted toward a distant horizon. De Morgan's work emphasized the theme of resilience, showing a subtle glimmer of color emerald embroidery on the sleeve amid the prevailing gloom. Theatrical interpretations of Catherine's life often dramatize her courage and suffering through staging of her famous letter. At the annual Shakespeare School Festival, first held in 1994, hundreds of student companies across the United Kingdom perform abridged scenes from Shakespeare's Henry VIII. In these schoolhouse productions, young actors don simple Tudor costumes and recreate the moment when Catherine kneels before Cardinal Wolsey in Act 4, Scene 2, pleading for her lawful status. The scene typically concludes with the actor reciting Catherine's dying pledge, "Mine eyes desire you above all things," her voice echoing through school halls and stirring audiences with its blend of defiance and devotion. Modern film and television have further deepened Catherine's portrayal, adding interior monologues and symbolic imagery to her final moments. In the Showtime series The Tudors, which aired from 2007 until 2010, Catherine's last letter is dramatized in dimly lit chambers at Kimbleton Castle. The scene, written for television, though not part of the historical record, shows Catherine closing her eyes as she pens her words by candlelight. The camera lingers on her trembling hand before pulling back to reveal her frail figure, emphasizing the contrast between her physical weakness and the moral strength embodied in her letter. The soundtrack of The Tudors frequently employs a minor key piano motif during Catherine's scenes, reinforcing the mournful yet resolute tone of her final act. Similarly, the Starz production, The Spanish Princess, first broadcast in 2019, offers a more expansive view of Catherine's internal life. In episode 9, set in January 1536, Catherine is depicted rehearsing her letter aloud in the chapel, her whispered words reverberating off stone walls. Actors portraying her attendants hold candles that flicker in the vaulted crypt, and the lighting design casts dancing shadows that mirror Catherine's emotional turmoil. Composer Christian Henson's score underlays the scene with a single cello line, its long descending notes heightening the sense of impending loss. On stage, musical expressions of Catherine's legacy lean into the power of silence and forgiveness. One such work, Elegy for a Queen, premiered at the Globe Theatre in June of 2017. This semi-staged choral piece sets Catherine's letter to music. Sopranos intone her final phrases in unison, while tenors and basses provide a hushed, chant-like accompaniment. At key moments such as the line, "I forgive you everything," the choir falls silent for several heartbeats before resuming, rendering the absence of sound itself a poignant gesture. Actors who take on Catherine's role often remark that the true dramatic climax lies not in grand speeches, but in the Queen's silent resolve. In a 2018 interview for The Guardian, actress Charlotte Hope, who played Catherine in The Spanish Princess, noted that the moment you hear her say, "Mine eyes desire you above all things," you feel the entire court hold its breath. Her forgiveness is a psychological strike, more potent than any accusation. Directors stage that line at center stage, often leaving the actor still and silent afterward, allowing the audience to absorb the full weight of Catherine's moral victory. Throughout galleries, school auditoriums, sound stages, and concert halls, Catherine of Aragon's story is retold with a focus on her intellect, faith, and the quiet power of her final letter. The recurring motif of candlelight, whether in oil paint, on a dimly lit set, or around a chapel altar, serves as a visual metaphor for her unwavering spirit. Music composers, playwrights, and filmmakers continue to revisit her narrative, drawn to the paradox of a woman rendered vulnerable by exile and illness, yet capable of wielding forgiveness as a weapon more formidable than any sword. Thus, Catherine's legacy in visual art and popular culture endures as a sleep-inducing yet profound meditation on the interplay of power, piety, and personal agency. In every nuanced portrayal, be it on canvas or screen, her life reminds us that true strength often resides in silence, that the written word can outlast a kingdom, and that forgiveness, offered at the moment of deepest suffering, can echo across centuries with a voice as clear and persistent as candlelight in the dark. And so we come to the gentle close of Catherine's story, a soft exhale after the long storm of her life. Imagine the flicker of a single candle, its flame wavering ever so slightly against the hush of a dim chamber. Let your thoughts drift with the quiet warmth of that light, as if you too are seated by Catherine's side, listening to the soft scratch of pen on parchment. In these final moments, the pace slows. No more courtly bustle, no more proclamations or heavy robes, only the quiet rhythm of breath and the steady beat of a faithful heart. The trials she endured, the losses she bore, and the courage she summoned, all recede into a gentle murmur, like distant waves rolling across a moonlit shore. You may feel the tension in your shoulders release, the weight of the day melting away as her story settles softly in your mind. What lingers now is the essence of her journey, a testament to unwavering devotion, the quiet power of forgiveness, and the dignity of a soul that refused to be broken. Catherine's gentle strength reminds us that true authority often resides not in force, but in compassion. That, even amid betrayal and exile, a single act of mercy spoken in calm resolve can transcend violence and reshape the course of history. It is a story of faith held fast, of love that endures beyond title and time. As the candle's glow fades into memory, imagine the pages of her final letter folding back into silence. Let the image blur at the edges, until all that remains is the soft echo of her words, resonant with both sorrow and grace. Feel your eyelids grow heavy, your mind drifting toward peaceful horizons, carried by the gentle tide of her legacy. And now, in this quiet space between sleep and wakefulness, we offer you a whisper. May you carry Catherine's spirit of resilience and compassion into your dreams, and may your heart find rest in the knowledge that kindness and forgiveness hold the greatest power of all. Good night, and if you would like to journey with us through more untold histories and stories that soothe the soul, please subscribe and join our channel for all the newest and most beautiful tales we have yet to share. Hey guys, tonight we will explore the story of Catherine of Aragon's final revenge, the letter that destroyed Henry VIII. 20 years ago, Catherine of Aragon gave her entire heart and crown to King Henry VIII,